Hello and welcome to the Kings Weekly Podcast, part of the Believe Network, the Basketball Intelligence Network, and the Old Man Squad Network. I'm your co-host, Nick Agar Johnson, editor-in-chief and staff writer for No Ceilings NBA, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, the founder and curator of the Basketball Intelligence newsletter, available at basketballintelligence.net, Ray LeBove. Hello there, Ray.
Hey, Nick, and welcome, everybody.
So this is the moment that I think quite a few of you have been waiting for in, the middle part of our three-part series on the Kings rookies and the one where we talk about Maxime Raynaud. So for those of you who have been waiting, don't worry, we've got it covered. And so in our previous episode, if you hadn't had a chance to check that out yet, we did a full breakdown of the rookie season from Nick Clifford, the 24th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft that the Kings traded for with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Maxime Raynaud was taken with the one pick that the Kings had going into last year's draft, which was the 42nd overall pick. And you and I have talked many times already. I'm sure we will talk many times again about just how much Maxime Raynaud impressed us at Summer League. And interestingly enough, he had almost the opposite of the start to the season that Nick Clifford did, in the sense of Nick Clifford was in the starting lineup on opening night. Maxime Raynaud was not in the starting lineup on opening night. He did not start in the month of November either. And he's basically started every single game since the start of December. And, as of the last time I saw, he was ranked 5th on the NBA.com rookie ladder and was the only player within 30 picks of him that was in that top 5 group. So we are not the first to say that he has been remarkably impressive for a rookie period, and an absurd outlier in terms of how impressive he's been for a 42nd overall pick. And also just that he's a lot of fun to talk about, which, there has not been all that much fun in this season for the Sacramento Kings. And certainly Maxime Raynaud has been a driving factor in a large portion of the enjoyable parts of this basketball season for the Sacramento Kings.
I'll take issue with that a little bit. We might very well have been the first to say it, because we were on the Raynaud bandwagon before there was a bandwagon. So arguably we were the first. I don't know for sure, but I know we were among the very first.
I think there are some people in Paris and Palo Alto who might object to that a bit,
Maybe.
But certainly we were calling out the, hey, watch out for this guy in July when he didn't start a game, as I just mentioned, until December.
Overriding your modesty here.
There we go. Certainly we were among the earliest on the Maxime Raynaud.
Which I think, is a point that I talked about last time, and I want to reiterate, just because there's been so many, quite appropriately, negative things said about the Kings this year. One thing that I would say you can't say too many times is just what a great job they've done with scouting and player evaluation, et cetera, to come up with having only the 42nd choice and to come up with the 3 rookies that they came up with was really a marvelous accomplishment. Doesn't necessarily override all the terrible things, but it is in and of itself a very wonderful thing. And, they just did a terrific job, and you could throw Precious into that mix as well, given that no other team wanted him. And look how well he's played. And so you got to give him 5 for that. Raynaud, to me, has really done a great job. And again, it's the circumstance. Injuries opened up the time for him. Which he had nothing to do with that, it gave one less opportunity for them to mismanage him. So that's good. I mean, never would wish an injury on anybody, but that opened up that possibility, and he really has shown. We were very impressed with certain aspects of his defense when in summer league, particularly his communication, which I think is carried over. But I do think that's kind of, and I'd love to hear your take on that, obviously, but his offense has been much better than his defense this year. And, there are reasons for that, obviously, and I'll ask you to explore those. But, on the offensive side, he has a very sophisticated offense as far as I'm concerned in terms of the shots and the footwork and counters and all those sorts of things that he does so well. I've been quite impressed with that. Defensively, I guess you could say, tell me about his defense. He's a rookie. And so I'd love to hear what you have to say in response to all that.
Yeah, so I did want to circle back to the one team specific thing that you touched on, just to add a little bit more spice onto that, which is you and I talked a couple days ago about how, as much as that's been the most impressive part of the Scott Perry tenure at the top of the Kings front office, the young players, whether it be the three rookies or, as you mentioned, picking up Precious Achiuwa when nobody else was interested in him. But the thing that is most encouraging to me on that front is that has been the one long-term positive trend about the Kings as an operation, not just the Scott Perry tenure. I mean, for all that many other people quibbled with Monty McNair more than we did, we were far more in favor than certainly the consensus discussion got by the end of his time in Sacramento. That was something that he did a great job of on the margins. I mean, obviously our much beloved departed Prince Keon Ellis, but a ton of other first round slash. Yeah. I mean, the fact that Isaac Jones is an NBA player as an undrafted free agent guy is another huge win. And again, as successful as the first draft was for the Scott Perry front office, ultimately I have every reason to believe that it's everybody else in the scouting department who doesn't get the press of, hey, new general manager or new assistant general manager, right? But certainly the people from, third on the ladder on down in the scouting department have been consistently great at finding good players on the margins, be that second round, be that undrafted free agents, etc. So reason to believe that that's
a necessary point, and I'm glad that you made it.
Yeah, it's a positive trend that is not just, hey, the Scott Perry front office did a great job this first year. There's reason to believe that that's going to continue. But circling back to the Raynaud specific stuff, and, a lot of what we talked about with him was the communication on defense. And there's the obvious element of, first of all, the reason we talked about that as much is because that's the part you can't see on TV, right? Like if you're playing back summer league games, honestly, given that one of the games we saw was in Cox Pavilion, which is a much smaller arena, that
we were in like the second row or something.
Yeah, we were in the nice media seats because nobody else was taking those media seats. Right. But we were up close and personal. Yeah, exactly. We were up close and personal in an arena where, again, because Cox is so small, like maybe if you heard the broadcast, you could hear some of the communication. But the reason we emphasize that is because that was one of the things that, like, hey, you're not catching that if you're not seeing the games in person.
I would add to that. Well, someone might say, well, yeah, you were that close, you heard everything, so you heard what everybody said. Yes, that's the point. Nobody else was at that level of communication he was. It wasn't just that we were close enough to hear it, it's that we were close enough to hear what he was doing so well.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, oh, he stood out in that game. It was both you and I said, like, I don't think we heard someone be this active and vocal as a communicator as a rookie, like in our time at Summer League. And that was my fourth trip. That was your 975th. So, Ray's been at Summer League since before basketball was founded.
Since before there was a Summer League.
There you go. But that was the main reason that was the first thing that we pointed out. But there was a portion of the game before, like sort of in the warm-ups before you got to the arena, where I was talking with my No Ceilings colleague, Nathan Grubel, and we were watching warm-ups. And it was one of those things where with Raynaud, the thing that stood out in terms of the scouting was how advanced of an offensive game he had. But the thing that really stood out watching him in person as opposed to seeing him on tape was it wasn't just the variety of his offensive game, it was how fluid he was. It's like, oh, okay, he's got a great handle for a 7-footer. And then watching him in Summer League, it's like, no, he's actually just got a pretty solid handle for a basketball player who also happens to be 7'1". And, there were certainly some of the concerns, and I would argue limited given how remarkable of a year he's had, but some of the offensive concerns that I and others might have had reared their head during Summer League. I mean, notably, he shot 26% from 3-point range, which is, 25% from 3-point range, which is not fantastic. And that certainly carried over to this season. But really, he wasn't this, wildly prolific 3-point shooter at Stanford either. It was mostly just, okay, this guy's got great touch. You can see that in the mid range, and all of those sorts of things. But again, I mean, he hit 35% of his threes at Stanford, sure, but his 3-point attempt rate was never all that dramatic. I mean, his senior year at Stanford was the one year in college he took more than 63s on the year, right? Like until his final season, that wasn't part of his offensive profile in any sort of real serious way. So, the 3-point.
Isn't there a league rule though that says if you your game is all inside and you went to Stanford and you're close to 7 feet or 7 feet, that by X year you will have become a great 3-point shooter?
I mean, you've heard me talk about Brook Lopez before, haven't you?
Just asking.
Well, I mean, do you really want to get me started on the Brook Lopez rant again? Because I'll do it. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
It seemed to me there's a rule. But okay.
But, again, a lot of the reason to buy into his offensive game at Stanford was less, oh, this guy is, like young Kristaps Porzingis just putting up a ton of threes off the dribble, getting these wild looks from long range. It was more just, this is someone who improved dramatically from the free throw line over the course of his college career and showed in the mid-range that he was someone who had great touch, but until his senior year was never just bombing away from 3-point range. And, that's been the case in his rookie year, and that's maybe the one sort of weakness that you can point to. But, we've gotten this far in, and I haven't given the sort of basic log line stuff with him. So 68 games, 50 of them starts, every single one of those starts, again, coming after the end of the month of November. So all of them December or later when, as you mentioned, he, unfortunately due to injury, but fortunately for the sake of his career, worked his way into the starting lineup and has been a mainstay ever since. I mean, just a tick over 7 rebounds a game, but I mean, he's had quite a few double doubles. He had this still annoys me. He had a 2020 game, and then after the game, one of those rebounds was taken away. And so technically his career high is 19, but he had a 2020 game. I refuse to let anyone take that away from me. But 57% from the field overall, 31% from 3-point range, 78% from the free throw line. And, in addition to that, 1.5 assists per game, half a steal, half a block per game, decent number of fouls, 2.5 fouls a game. He's had games where he's had foul trouble. I mean, literally in the Kings' previous game previous as we are recording this, but their previous game against the Brooklyn Nets, he had 5 fouls. He nearly fouled out in that one. Again, a lot of what we liked about his defense was there's not really a good way to say this, but sort of the effort stuff that isn't really taught as much as either you do it or you don't. The physical profile was certainly much more tending towards positive on the offensive end than the defensive end. And, that showed up. To be 7-1, as you mentioned, yes, he's a rookie, and the expectation should be that all rookies are terrible to below average on defense. And the fact that 2 of the 3 rookies for the Kings do not fit into that category is extremely the exception and not the rule. And so the fact that Raynaud has been a poor defender is, I don't want to overstate the case of, no, this guy's actually been great. It's like there's been a lot of struggles. And I mean, most notably for me is the fact that opponents are shooting just a hair under 70% against Raynaud at the basket per synergy, which is nowhere near as bad as Marvin Bagley, but is also not a number that you really would like to see. The flip side of that is, again, here's the embarrassing part. That number is actually wrong. Opponents are shooting 65% against him at the rim. The number I had pulled up was his own scoring at the rim, where he's shooting nearly 70% around the basket, which is quite a solid number, even for a big man, and especially for a big man that's not your, DeAndre Jordan, Rudy Gobert, Dylan Cardwell, honestly, type of, never shoots outside of 3 feet away from the basket. So again, there's really not all that much to quibble with the offense other than the shooting stuff, which I do want to get into in more detail in a moment. But it's not just that he, entered the starting lineup and immediately was a really solid starter, which he has been, but it's also the growth that he's shown over the course of the season. I mean, especially over the last, post All-Star break run, you and I have talked before, and we'll talk again about the sort of weirdness of the silly season of, the teams that are in the position of the Kings of not playing for anything in terms of postseason basketball. And, one can quibble with how actively they've been trying to lose games, but certainly not, trying to run the table exactly at this point. But Raynaud has responded really positively to being given more playmaking responsibility as the season rolls along. And, again, other than the shooting stuff, he's done pretty much everything you could have possibly hoped for and more on the offensive end. And the double doubles and near double doubles are certainly a nice plus in terms of, other things that he's providing. But really, it's not just that he started the year strong and has continued strong on the offensive end, but it's the growth that we've seen in terms of, the shooting might be the biggest one that people notice, but I mean, he's almost doubled his assist total from any other month in the season in March, which, for all that's worth in terms of how highly you value March basketball, it is certainly saying something that he's been asked to fulfill that role and has been quite solid at it. Turnovers aside, he's done quite a good job of fitting into a role that wasn't a role he was expected to fill at any point up until, literally after the All-Star break when it's like, hey, Maxime, we need you to pass more.
Well, I want to ask you about this because it's something that I haven't really been looking for or studied, but couldn't help but notice. And you, from a scouting perspective, what you think? It seems like nothing seems to faze him, and that he understands his situation, the team's situation. I spoke earlier last episode about context being king, and he understands the context, and he's not fazed by it. But you're a rookie, and you come into a situation that is wildly structured, poorly if structured at all, and what is exactly your role, and what is it that even if you played at a very high level for a rookie is not going to really have any impact, on the outcome. You're still going to lose almost every game. And he's focused, and he's focused on doing the right thing in the right time, in the right way. Not that he always does, but he certainly tries to, and he does, and he succeeds vast preponderance of the time. It's a highly, in my view, difficult circumstance for somebody to be reflective of those sorts of qualities in their game. And I was curious what you would think about that.
So I think it's a very good point. I think there are two separate elements to which I view this from, which is the first one, which is almost more of a caveat than anything else, which is, yes, you're right. It's exceptionally rare for a rookie to be as poised as he is. That being said, I'm not as surprised by it as I might be for other rookies, precisely because of the nature of his offensive game, in that he's as versatile as he is, right? It's like, for most 7-footers, if the ball swings their way and they're out beyond the 3-point line, the vast majority of bigs don't have all that many counters that they can employ in that kind of situation, right? It's like, there aren't that many 7'1" guys who are even adequate shooters, and so they're not going to try and pull up from 3. There are very few 7'1" guys who have any sort of functional handle in a way that, they can drive past people, get around people, create space, hesitation, step back, whatever it might be, right? It's like they're not comfortable.
Not Jokic.
Yeah, well, Jokic is the obvious, top line example, but, and you and I have talked about this before, of, for as wonderfully gifted on the offensive end as Domantas Sabonis is, he's not someone who will get the ball 30 feet from the rim, pump fake, dribble drive past someone, and get all the way from 30 feet out to the basket, right? It's like on most of his possessions, it's either a dribble handoff kind of deal at the top of the key, or he's, getting into the post and, getting from 15 feet to the rim. Domantas Sabonis is excellent at, one of the better players in the NBA, certainly well above Raynaud in that regard. But just purely in terms of driving the ball all the way from the 3-point line to the basket, Raynaud is remarkably gifted at that for a player of his size, his age, any of those caveats that you want to add together. So for me, a lot of the, sort of unfazedness of his offensive game is because, unlike a lot of players, wherever he catches the ball, he has a few different things that he can do.
He's not lost.
Well, he's not lost, but also he has counters, right? It's like, okay, they're playing me, they're daring me to shoot. Great, I'll shoot. I'm fine with that, right? For all that we both love Dylan Cardwell, and we'll have plenty of praise for him on our next episode, if Dylan Cardwell catches the ball 25 feet from the basket, he's not, crossing someone over and, driving into the mid-range, posting someone up, turning around and hitting a 15-footer, right? That's not something that's in his wheelhouse in a way that it is for Raynaud, in a way that, again, all caveats aside about how poised he is for a rookie, it makes more sense to me that he has that kind of unfazedness than it would be for someone who doesn't have as many answers. And that also leads to why I'm so bullish on Raynaud's future is, as we'll get into, I've been teasing it that we'll talk about the 3-point shooting more, and we will in just a minute, but it's the everything else to his game that allows the opening for, oh, well, I guess we can't leave this guy alone at the 3-point line. And rather than just either I catch and shoot or I have to move the ball on to the next guy, it's like Maxime Raynaud is very happy to pump fake and drive around people if they give him that opportunity, which makes it all the more dangerous if he can get to a point where the 3-point shot is a consistent weapon for him.
Well, I'm going to agree with everything that you said, and I will add one thing, just ask you this. It strikes me that it isn't just a function of him possessing all those skills. We've seen players who have all those skills, don't have the maturity, and they're great in the gym, but they're not great on the floor in the game.
Of course, and that's why I provided the caveat. I just mean purely in terms of, you could have the poise but not have the counters, and then it might not look as good. Or you can be, as you mentioned, the kind of player who, can do all of this in an open gym. Like, it sticks with me forever, that one picture that somebody took that they definitely were not allowed to take, but did anyway, of the 2012 Lakers free throw numbers. And it was like Dwight Howard hits 82% of his free throws in practice. And then the game comes around and he can't quite do it, right? That's, again, even for, Dwight Howard should have been on the 75 at 75 NBA team, truly one of the greatest centers in NBA history. And that still applied to him, right? So it's not necessarily, oh, if you're a good player, you're automatically good in those kinds of clutch situations. But also, it's like Maxime Raynaud has a lot more answers for questions that defenses give him. And certainly that makes it easier for him to feel like, no, I could do this because I've done this before and I'll do it again.
For sure.
So now that I've teased it, I do want to get into a deeper discussion of the 3-point shooting stuff. And he's taken less than one 3-pointer a game. So the sample size is really not large enough for me to feel too confident in any sort of conclusion. That being said, in the month of March, he hit 44% from 3. And, that wasn't on that many attempts, but it was also on more 3-point attempts than he's taken in any other month this year. And, part of that is just an element of, the obvious that we don't need to brush aside of, hey, the Kings had a lot of guys who normally take a lot more shots who stopped playing right around the day after the All-Star break, which, freed up more opportunities for Raynaud to take those looks. And certainly his run in March, before that, he was in the 20s from 3-point range, which is not the most encouraging. again, I'm at a place with it where because he's got all of the in between stuff that you would like, and because, as I mentioned when I pulled up the correct stats, I'm 0 for 2 on our rookie pods in terms of accidentally pulling up the wrong numbers for something and then realizing in real time that I'd screwed that up. But I mean, his finishing around the basket is very, very strong, and his continued growth as a shooter is really encouraging, especially given that if you look at some of the mid-range stuff as opposed to the three-point shooting, there's a little bit more reason to be encouraged with some of those numbers. But also the flip side is he hasn't really been taking all that many mid-range looks that aren't out of post-ups. So, again, it's not like there are many centers who are dribbling into 12-foot pull-up shots, but small sample size though it is, he's been better at his jump shots from the mid-range than from three-point range, which, I I will give my mini Brooke Lopez thing here, which is just the fact that he was one of the best mid-range shooters in basketball and an 83% free throw shooter before he literally just took one gigantic Brooke Lopez step backwards and those 20-footers became 23-foot threes. Beyond just the fact that they are clearly very brilliant dudes who went to Stanford and, et cetera, right? There's reason for me to believe that Raynaud is a better long range shooter than he showed, just because every other element of his game, the touch is abundantly clear. I mean, he's shooting 77% on his runners, and he's taken a lot more of those than he has straight up jump shots from the mid range. He's taken, he's in the 99th percentile in terms of runner frequency. People know he's taken that look, and he's still hitting him 53% of the time. So, again, I have every reason to believe that his offensive game will continue to expand. And that's especially encouraging because it's already so expensive.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm thinking about if he were to be traded, which he won't be, to another team, the games that he would play against the Kings where they don't guard the three-point line, and so every three-pointer he would attempt would have no one within 10 or 12 feet of him, he might shoot 80%.
Well, hopefully we don't have to consider the hypothetical now or anytime within the foreseeable future of what does Maxime Raynaud look like against the Kings, because hopefully the Kings, actually hang on to the dude who's literally fifth. Of
course they will. Oh, no, I can't say that.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Logic would say that they will.
Yeah, so before we get to our final segment, I do feel like we have to at least touch on some of the defensive stuff that we haven't hit yet, because, again, it's not as fun to talk about because there are a lot more problems there than on the offensive end. And I will give my one caveat up top, which is just that Dylan Cardwell being Dylan Cardwell, playing the two of them together erases a lot of Raynaud's problems, because his biggest problems are defending around the basket. And, again, when I got the correct number, it was still not pretty in terms of him allowing, just under 65% at the rim. NBA league average is just a hair under 60%. So usually when it's a 7'1" guy, the, percentage at the rim is a little bit lower than NBA average. It being higher than that is really not a good sign for Raynaud. And that number is much more concerning to me than the shot blocking. There are guys who can defend the rim really well without blocking shots. Like, not a current NBA example, but one that I've looked into quite heavily because I wrote about him this year over at NoCeilingsNBA.com, in Chris Sinak Jr., the center for the Houston Cougars, who he has never been a prolific shot blocker, but this past season, despite him averaging under a block a game, opponents shot 45% against him around the basket because he's a big dude who knows how to use his size, obviously playing under one of the best coaches in the world in Kelvin Sampson over at Houston. That was one of the things where it was a concern for me heading in, but clearly he showed, again, there's a big gulf between, I'm a great shot blocker and opponents don't shoot well against me versus it's much more important to just have those lower, at rim numbers against you. I mean, not to throw it back to another failed Kings experiment, but Hassan Whiteside would frequently be at or near the top of the league leaderboard in block shots, but his percentages in terms of opponent shooting around the basket were nowhere near the same level as they were for Rudy Gobert, right? Who, in addition to having all those blocked shots, also does a great job of just making those shots difficult around the basket. And so for Raynaud to be 7'1" and not really do either of those, it's a concern, and I don't want to gloss over it. Again, I think a lot of the communication he does, a lot of how fluidly he moves athletically, makes me more willing to believe in, okay, he can be, I'm not even sure he's going to reach average, but like he can be a below average, but not too much of a problem defender if he has shot blocking help alongside him. And that's where having Cardwell as the next player that we're going to cover makes it a lot easier for me to be less concerned about the Raynaud side of things. So, again, we've talked about some of the defensive concerns with Raynaud, but first of all, again, worth mentioning that having Dylan Cardwell as his running mate is hugely helpful, but also I think worth circling back to the fact that the positive value of his communication and his mobility on defense are genuine pluses, and they are the kinds of defensive skills that will be very helpful in terms of making up for the things that he's not quite as good at. So again, don't want to overstate the case with his defense, but there are plenty of reasons for me to believe that he can get to a point where he's good enough on the defensive end that you're not as concerned about it. And especially when you can do everything that you can do on the offensive end, there's a lot of room for him to not necessarily be at that level defensively and still be a hugely positive player.
Totally agree.
All right. So now before we wrap things up, we did in part one, the first part of the other 3-part exercise that we're doing as part of this mini series of our song title and lyrics thing that we've been doing for the last few months. So Ray, why don't you intro that before we close this one out?
So every episode, we have a song title that each of us comes up with that is intended to reflect the state of the Kings. For this series, we had specific aspects that we were targeting. And in the Clifford episode, the question was how realistic, how would you rate the chances for the Kings to become serious contenders within 4 years? My song title that I came up with was from Elvis Costello. With all of my answers in this series are going to be from Elvis Costello, but that one was Less Than Zero. And Nick, you chose from Ed Sheeran.
Yes, so I also will be choosing only songs from one artist, and I picked Ed Sheeran, and my choice for the last episode was I'm a Mess, which I think pretty well encapsulates where the Kings are at right about now.
So for this episode, the question, rather than being realistically, what are the chances that the Kings will be serious contenders within 4 years? It's optimistically, how likely do you think it will be that the Kings can become serious contenders within 4 years? My choice for this one is accidents will happen.
Oh, we're keeping this a surprise from each other by my request because I wanted to be surprised, and I love that one for multiple reasons. The not the least of which being that not to spoil my next pick, but what you just said absolutely hilariously meshes with the lyric pick that I have for our next episode. So I know you're going to enjoy that one when it comes down the pike, but my Ed Sheeran choice for this one is perfect. we're looking optimistically, right? Hey, the Kings pick up Cam Boozer at number 2. They exorcise the demons of Marvin Bagley, and Cam Boozer is by far the best player in the draft, and he plugs in all the holes for the Kings, and they're a contender in 4 years. So there you go.
Well done. Yeah.
All right, so that will do it for us for today's episode, the second one of the week and the second part of our 3-part series on the Kings rookies. So thank you all so much for tuning in. If you've been enjoying the show, please take the time to leave a rating and or a review in whatever podcast player you might be using, and subscribe if you haven't yet. 5-star reviews always appreciated. If you're checking us out on YouTube, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And as mentioned up top, we are part of the Believe Network, which you can find on social media at BLEAV. We are part of the Basketball Intelligence Network, which you can find on basketballintelligence.net and also social media at Ticket Rules. And we are part of the Old Man Squad Network, which you can find on social media at Old Man Squad. And as always, if you've been enjoying the show, you can feel free to reach out to us either via our own social media at Kings Weekly Pod on Twitter, at Kings Weekly Podcast on Blue Sky, or you can shoot us an email, kingsweeklypodcast@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.